Pete Alonso has rejected the New York Mets counter offer to him. Did David Stearns and the Mets lowball Pete Alonso in this counter offer? We are getting right into that on the True Mets Talk podcast. Welcome back to the True Mets Talk podcast. It's your boy CP. And yesterday was an eventful day with many details coming out on the Pete Alonso saga, both from Pete Alonso's side and from the New York Mets side. We are getting into the latest offer that Pete Alonso rejected, talking about that deal coming from the New York Mets over to Pete Alonso for him to reject. And we're also talking about Vladdy Jr. and some of the stuff that we've been hearing out of the Blue Jays camp and a potential trade. Before we fully get into it, please do smash those like buttons, subscribe to the channel. Just about 5 subscribers away from 2K on the channel. I appreciate the support. And also comment your thoughts and opinions down below on these very topics. Okay, it was reported last week, going through the timeline once again, because we were live yesterday talking about the Jesse Winker signing, as well as the Pete Alonso news that the Mets were pivoting to a plan B with the expectation that he was going elsewhere. And then we kind of had to wait a couple of hours until the official numbers came out. And according to this report right here from Joel Sherman, the New York Mets counter offer was for 3 years, anywhere between the $68 to $70 million range. Now, I'm going to take the safe bet here and say it was an even 70, which puts the AAV total for those 3 years at $23.3 million. And if you want to compare how that lines up to the Mets' original offer last offseason to Pete Alonso, 7 years worth $158 million, that was just about $22.5 million per year. So just about $1 million differential higher from these two offers that were on the table from Pete Alonso from one offseason to the other. Now, we can get into whether Pete Alonso deserves that pay bump with what he produced in 2024 in the regular season. Again, I've said time and time again that Pete Alonso saved himself a little bit of money by having a pretty strong performance in the playoffs for the New York Mets. He hit 270 just about in the playoffs in 2024 and a couple home runs. One of those home runs being probably one of the most clutch home runs in Mets playoff history, if not the most clutch home run in Mets playoff history. So again, he did save face a little bit, especially with this fan base and probably to the eyes of the front office as well. But when you take a look at this offer right here and Pete Alonso still rejecting it, that begs the question, how far off is the differential of AAV numbers between these two parties? Now, I will also follow up because there was a report stating that this Mets counteroffer did not have any opt-outs associated with it. And Pete Alonso's exclusive deal to the Mets did have opt-outs. That was debunked by Will Salmon later last night. And he stated that the Mets actually did have opt-outs associated with their counteroffer to Pete Alonso. So again, the opt-outs weren't the issue. The years weren't the issue because they're both at 3 years with opt-outs. It's the AAV, which has been probably what Mets fans have thought all along, even not knowing the numbers. But it's good to actually have the numbers now. Now we can get into, Pete Alonso's deservingness of this contract, if that's even a word. But again, I'm going to roll with it. $23.5 million in a short-term deal is a little bit of a low ball. I objectively have to state that it's a little bit of a low ball coming from the New York Mets in relation to the talks that we've been having pretty much all offseason long in these sweepstakes for Pete Alonso. But on the flip side of the coin, while I objectively did just state that that is a low ball, Pete Alonso's probably in the realm of $26 to $28 million in his asking price. Maybe he's even at 30, which is a little bit crazy at this point. But does he have any other offers on the table? Because we know the Toronto Blue Jays are involved. We know that there's another mystery team involved. But how can the New York Mets up their offer from $23.5 million if there's no other offer to their knowledge on the table to Pete Alonso from any other team in the league. Now, we can also get into, and I do want to discuss why these numbers leaked. Is it coming from Scott Boras and the Alonso camp, or is it coming from the New York Mets camp strategically, understanding that now he is having talks with other teams? It's coming from the New York Mets side. Understanding that other teams are now involved, leaking this number and setting the precedent of $23.5 million while Pete Alonso goes to negotiate elsewhere. Maybe the Blue Jays offer him $25 million per. And Boras all along, even with Juan Soto, said the right thing to do is come back to the New York Mets just in case they are willing to match or exceed that offer from a different team. The same thing is going to apply here to Pete Alonso in this situation, which is why I am not ruling out at all a reunion still with the Mets and Pete Alonso, even after these reports came out yesterday. Again, the expectation, that's the key word. It's the expectation of the Mets that he is moving on, but it's not off the table that they get a deal done still. If it takes Pete Alonso going to the Blue Jays, getting their value, then the Mets can decide if they want to match that value or exceed it. And if it's $25 million per, if they have to go up from 23.5 to $25 million, I think the New York Mets are going to do that. I truly believe that. Because I don't think $1 million, not even $2 million differential AAV is going to keep the Mets from having Pete Alonso come back to Queens. And until he signs a deal elsewhere for similar value, I will remain true in that sentiment. But let's also take a look at, we've talked about pivot points. We'll talk about Nolan Arenado more. We're going live tonight on the Mets Hot Stove live stream, Rob and myself discussing this very topic. But let's talk about Vladimir Guerrero Jr., right? Who is the most obvious pivot point for the New York Mets at this point. And so often we've heard the Jays are not going to trade Vlad Guerrero Jr. this offseason. They're not going to do it. And you know what? As soon as these Pete Alonso reports came out that the Toronto Blue Jays are heavily involved, and maybe even the favorites, there is no chance Pete Alonso and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. are coexisting on the same team. Oh, and by the way, the opt-outs that Pete Alonso offered in this exclusive deal to the New York Mets, that's indicative of him wanting to go back onto the market next offseason, even if that means he's alongside Vlad Guerrero Jr. because he still wants a long-term deal. He still wants a long-term deal. And that's very important. He still thinks he can get a long-term deal if he produces fantastic numbers in 2025, even alongside Vlad Guerrero Jr. And you know what? He can. He absolutely can. And I've stated that multiple times on this podcast already. But let's talk about Vlad Guerrero Jr. We've been hearing that it's unlikely the Mets make a move for Vlad Guerrero Jr. this offseason. A lot of fans are saying to hold out, until he hits free agency. If Brett Baty is competing at third base come opening day as an everyday third baseman, we've got a problem. The New York Mets pivoting from Pete Alonso is not a problem, but if they're going to rely on Brett Baty to be that everyday third baseman, that's where I draw the line into it becoming a problem. Again, Ronnie Mauricio is not fully healthy from what we know right now, coming from Mike Puma in a report yesterday. So that's a question mark within itself. Would we rely on Luis Angel Acuna, who hasn't really had many reps at third base, if at all, in his career? We know he's a plus defender with a great arm. I think he can make that transition. But again, you're talking about a risk. And carrying risks positionally, one, is not up the alley of David Stearns' philosophy, and two, should not be the philosophy of a win-now team trying to compete with the Dodgers and other NL favorites for a championship. But in this report right here, the Toronto Blue Jays have changed their tune. All of a sudden, at first it was they're not trading Vladdy, but now If they were to trade Vladdy, they want a Yankees type return in what they gave up for Juan Soto to the San Diego Padres. So now we're starting to see that transition take center stage. Yes, they're probably still trying to negotiate with Vladdy, but they know they're not going to do it if they bring Pete Alonso into those doors. And by the way, the Yankees return and what they gave up for Juan Soto, really in the grand scheme of things, was not all that much for Juan Soto. Same situation, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. presumably is a rental, just like Juan Soto was when he went from San Diego to the New York Yankees. They gave up a top 100 prospect at the time, number 99 in Drew Thorpe. They gave up an MLB-ready pitcher in Michael King, a number 13 overall prospect in the Yankees farm system at that time, and a couple of additional names. So again, the return wasn't that much, and the Mets can definitely do that if the Toronto Blue Jays are looking for that type of deal. I will preface that by saying, no, the Mets don't have the ability to replicate a Michael King, but they have the prospect capital to blow the Blue Jays away in a potential deal if they really wanted to. But again, is that David Stearns' philosophy? Does he make that move knowing the Mets could just pursue him next offseason? My entire sentiment here is if the Blue Jays are willing to trade Vlad Guerrero this offseason, we're not looking to 2026. We're looking at 2025. You make that move and you give up the prospect capital. I have a very hard time believing the Mets actually do it. But at the end of the day, as we've stated, and as Mets fans have given this sentiment, and they are absolutely correct from what I'm gathering, we are done waiting for 2026. We are done waiting for the next year. You brought in Juan Soto. You're on the brink of letting Pete Alonso walk, who would have been a nice pairing with Juan Soto in that lineup. Okay, fine. You can't come to an agreement with the AAV. That's okay. There needs to be a strong pivot point. And if it's not Vlad Guerrero Jr. this offseason via trade, it has to be another bat on this market via trade or free agency that's still left available. So we'll talk about the pivot points more in depth on our live stream tonight. Again, I appreciate you all tuning into the True Mets Talk podcast. It's your boy CP. Smash those like buttons. Let me know what you think. A lot of different reports, a lot of different opinions. Let's have a discussion in the comments section and make sure to subscribe to the channel. I definitely appreciate it. Let's go Mets. We'll see how this plays out.